Since the building's almost done, I need a new console to play, since it's gonna be my own type of setup deal. Oh, hey, the Super Nintendo Classic looks kind of cool. I like other games. Wonder if anyone knows anything about it. Maybe Patrick knows about it, or maybe Noah. Mark knows a lot about Photoshop. Maybe he also knows video games. Mike, I think Brian knows about video games. Let me call Brian. Oh, hey Brian.
Mike, you don't understand. The Bears. Mike, the Bears.
I was just gonna ask if you knew anything about the SNES Classic.
Oh, the SNES Classic? Yeah. I know so much about the SNES Classic. In fact... And then during that snap, he would,
Transition over to the actual video.
Yeah. Back in 2016, Nintendo released their NES Classic, which was a miniature console designed to look like the original NES and came with 30 preloaded games. The console came out just in time for the holiday season, and it was sold out everywhere. Originally selling for a suggested retail price of $59.99, the console ended up being scalped by resellers online for almost 10 times the price. The idea of a miniature console was incredibly trendy at the time, and so a lot of people went ahead and used Raspberry Pi computers to try to recreate the experience of the NES Classic, and companies like Retroflag even made NES-inspired shells to make them look like the classic mini console. Skip ahead to 2017 and catch me standing in line at Target at 5 AM ready to buy the Super Nintendo Classic, which was a miniature version of the Super Nintendo. Instead of having 30 games, it came with 20 plus games, so 21. It was advertised as having 20 plus because it included Star Fox 2, an unreleased game which added to its value even more. You had to play the first level of Star Fox 1 to unlock it, but whatever. I then put the console safely in my closet, and promptly forgot about it for 3 years. So anyway, let's talk about the SNES Classic. The 20 games on the SNES Classic are incredibly good games. All the classics you would expect are on it. Super Mario World, Mario Kart, Zelda Link to the Past, Donkey Kong Country. You have Earthbound, which is cool because it's obviously the best video game ever made. Kirby, Street Fighter, Mega Man X, they're all here. Fire Emblem. Okay, but remember those Raspberry Pi things? You could put any game you wanted on them. And why should I have to buy the NES Classic at an insane, inflated price when I already have the SNES one? Well, that's where the hacker community comes in. This program is called Hackchi, and it is compatible with the NES Classic, SNES Classic, and the Sega Genesis Classic. But I was never really a Sega person, so I don't care about that one too much. The way Hackchi works is pretty interesting, but I have to talk about some technical aspects about how the NES and SNES Classics work for a second. I'll use the NES Classic specifications in these descriptions, but just know that both systems run the exact same internals. In plainest terms, the consoles run a variation of the emulators built into the Wii's Virtual Console, which was Nintendo's way of selling ROMs for $5 a pop. Fun fact, at that rate to have all 30 games released on the NES Classic on your Wii would cost you, let's say 5 times 30, $150. That is an insane markup! SNES games were $8, so that would be 8 times 21, $168! The built-in memory of the units far exceeds the necessary memory of the included games due to the fact that it would be cheaper to manufacture 512 megabyte storage than to try to scale it down to a defunct storage space of 8 megabytes. The average NES ROM was only about 8 kilobytes, so the grand total of all 30 NES games was only about 5.8 to 6 megabytes. What did the system natively do with the other 500 megabytes? Mostly it was allocated to save states, allowing you to save up to 4 save states per game, but there was really no expectation that it would fill up the entire memory of the system. So the way that Hackchi works is you plug your system into your computer and the program accesses the internal memory of the system, sort of like plugging in a thumb drive. You could then take any extra NES ROMs that you happen to legally own and put them into the system. As of Hackchi CE 3.0, the program will automatically scrape these ROM files, essentially googling the games in the background for information on them, cover art, and how many players the game has. Once it synchronizes with your console, the games will be on there until you take them off, essentially making it foolproof. The entire library of the NES, a little over 700 games, can easily fit on the system, but in all likelihood, how often are you going to play Sesame Street for the NES? Moving on to the Super Nintendo though, the best part about Hakshi is that it can run a custom software of RetroArch, which is a wide-range emulator that runs on select cores, one for each console and file type. What this means is you can take ROMs from other systems' libraries and add them into the NES or SNES Classic. So for example, you can add the entire library of the NES Classic onto the SNES Classic, giving you the ability to play a combined total of 51 games. But let's say you want to play games from the Sega Genesis Classic or the TurboGrafx Mini. Easy enough, you just have to make sure the games are set to run with their correct emulator core. You can even set up folders with a wide array of images already loaded into the Hakshi folder, as well as the ability to make your own. Personally, I like the aesthetic of Game Boy Advance games, so I made a folder of Game Boy games on my system. The internal file name is separate from the display file name, which can allow you to set up some pretty good organization. A good example of this is the Wario Land series, which goes like this: Super Mario Land, Super Mario Land 2, Wario Land, Super Mario Land 3, Wario Land II, Wario Land 3, and Wario Land 4. Due to the clunky nature of the franchise's titles, with the names being entirely out of order alphabetically, and with Wario Land 2 being Roman numerals for no reason, these would ordinarily be all over the place on the menu. Thanks to the internal naming though, I'm able to organize these with little difficulty and still have their correct names displayed on the screen. This is also helpful if you want to display your Pokemon games in chronological order. Now it's time to play! Unfortunately, the included controller has a very short wire length of about 3 feet long. This is fine if you're playing at your desk, but if you wanted to play in a living room, you're out of luck. Luckily, there are extension cords available by a large variety of third-party companies with an added unexpected benefit. The controller ports on the NES and SNES Classic are identical to the port on the bottom of a Wii Remote. This means a few things. First, if you had the Virtual Console games installed on your Wii and were pining after that Super Famicom Club Nintendo controller that used to sell on eBay for hundreds of dollars, you could just buy the SNES Classic controller on Nintendo's website for like $20 instead, and then enjoy your Virtual Console games with the controllers they were originally designed for. The other benefit is that if you already have a Wii Classic controller, it will work on your NES and SNES Classics. The Wii Classic controllers even have added functionality over their NES and SNES counterparts, with the home button taking you to the home menu in order to select a different game or make a save state. This would ordinarily involve pressing the reset button on the console itself, which might explain the relatively short cable to begin with. That being said though, the Wii Classic controllers have analog sticks, so let's go ahead and toss Super Mario 64 on the system now that we have a way to play it. Hell, let's toss in a modded version of Mario 64 by Kazuya Manuar too. We have plenty of space after all. Although the extension cord and Wii Classic controller are a nice way to play the system and work perfectly well, the SNES Classic has a bit of a design flaw in my opinion, and that's the controller ports. With the NES Classic, they just lined up the new controller ports on the front of the system, and it was close enough to the original design that no one really minded the change. With the SNES Classic, to make sure it looked like the SNES, a faux faceplate was placed on the front of the system that had to be manually lowered in order to access the ports. This seems to be a fair compromise, allowing the system to look like a collector's item on a shelf while maintaining functionality while in use. Still though, it would look a lot better if we could get rid of that wire altogether. Here's how we get rid of that wire altogether. A company called Brook has designed a device called the Nincade, which is essentially a Bluetooth controller module designed to fit inside of the NES or SNES Classic shell, which works by accessing the controller boards and looping into the existing internal wires. It may seem scary at first, but if you're smart enough to understand why you would want one, you should be smart enough to install it without trouble. The included double-sided tape will allow you to attach it to the internal aluminum heatsink, but the system shouldn't ever get hot enough for this to be an issue. Once installed, it circumvents the controller slot it's attached to, and will allow you to wirelessly attach a Bluetooth controller to act as that player in games. A fun thing to do now is to sync up the Wii Remote, allowing you to still use the same included controller the system wants you to use, but now from a greater distance. The syncing process is a little unique, since the Nincade is housed inside the microconsole shell, preventing them from putting in a sync button, and because there would be no spot for an LED to blink to confirm it's connecting, they had to do something a little unique. To sync a controller, a button combination was chosen, and to prevent it from being forgotten, it's a pretty familiar code most retro gamers should be familiar with. Up, up, down, down, left, right, B, A, start. That's right, it's the Konami code. Instead of an on-screen message or a blinking LED though, the Nincade has a built-in speaker on the chip, which will make a beeping sound signaling that it's working. It's at this point you should press the sync button on your Bluetooth controller. But if we're already trying to get rid of the wires, why would we still have to deal with the wire connecting the Wii Classic controller to the Wii Remote? You can actually attach any Bluetooth controller you want, so if you have a spare PS3 or PS4 controller lying around, you can sync that right up and play some Super Mario World 2 Yoshi's Island the way God intended. The main problem with this method though is remembering that the X button on a PlayStation controller is different from the X button on an SNES controller. Luckily, there are a wide range of companies that make Bluetooth controllers with Nintendo themes already, a really popular one being 8BitDo. 8BitDo makes controllers for a lot of systems, but one thing they've been known for since the NES and SNES classics came out has been their NES and SNES themed controllers. If you don't want to open up the system, they offer an option of two SNES wireless controllers that use a 2.4 GHz connection. But since we're already going this far, we might as well go as hard as we can. The 8BitDo SN30 Pro comes in a neat SNES controller style look, with added functionality to make it compatible with the Nintendo Switch. These features include a home button, a capture button, added shoulder buttons, as well as motion controls. For the meager $45 to $50 it costs, a lot of people seem to prefer it to Nintendo's own Pro controller design. The only thing it doesn't have is the Amiibo compatibility, but the SNES Classic doesn't use Amiibo anyway. Although I do enjoy putting my Rob Amiibo next to my NES Classic when they're on display. So now we have an SNES Classic that plays all these old games with a wireless controller. What game should we test it on? Alright, I'm bored. Alright, Mike, so that's everything I know about the SNES Classic. Any questions?
I just wanted to know if I should buy one.
I mean, probably not. You could just get Raspberry Pi.
Okay.